when God asks you to release the dreams that were built from pressure, pride and fear instead of faith. Some ambitions looked powerful on the outside, but deep inside they left your spirit restless and disconnected. Not every opportunity is a divine assignment, and not every open door was meant for you to walk through. God is calling you back to peace, purpose, and obedience instead of endless striving. The hardest surrender is often letting go of the life you planned so you can receive the life He prepared. Some ambitions were never placed in your heart by God. They were planted there by comparison, pressure, fear, and the desperate need to feel important in the eyes of people. You looked around and saw others succeeding, building, achieving, gaining attention, and you slowly convinced yourself that you had to chase the same things in order to matter. What started as admiration quietly turned into competition. Instead of asking God where He wanted to lead you, you began asking yourself how fast you could keep up with everyone else. That is how many people lose their peace. They stop following purpose and start following pressure. Comparison has a dangerous way of making someone else's assignment look more valuable than your own. You begin to think your life is behind because it does not look like theirs. You start questioning your progress, your gifts, your season, and even your worth. The enemy knows that if he can keep your eyes on other people, he can keep your heart disconnected from the voice of God. Suddenly your decisions are no longer based on wisdom or obedience. They are based on appearance. You chase careers you never truly wanted, relationships that drain your spirit, lifestyles you cannot sustain, and goals that leave you empty after you finally reach them. There are people working every day toward dreams that were never connected to their calling. They are exhausted, frustrated, emotionally drained, and spiritually dry, because deep down they know they are building something God never asked them to build. They keep forcing doors open because they are afraid of being left behind. They keep saying yes to opportunities that feed their ego but starve their soul. They keep trying to become someone they were never created to be. The outside may look successful, but inside there is confusion, anxiety, and constant pressure to perform. God never intended for your identity to be built on comparison. Your value was never supposed to come from titles, applause, money, or status. The world teaches people to measure success by visibility, influence, and achievement, but God measures differently. He looks at obedience, humility, character, and faithfulness. Some of the greatest blessings come when nobody is watching, when nobody is applauding, and when nobody understands the process God is taking you through. Many people are carrying ambitions that were born from childhood wounds. They were rejected, ignored, underestimated, or made to feel small, so they grew up believing they had to achieve something massive to finally be accepted. They became addicted to proving themselves. Every accomplishment became another attempt to heal insecurity. Every goal became another way to silence the fear of not being enough. But no amount of success can heal a wound that only God can restore. If your ambition is rooted in brokenness, then even achievement will not satisfy you for long. Sometimes God allows frustration to enter your plans because He is trying to redirect your heart. He knows that if He lets you continue down certain paths, I will gain everything outwardly while losing yourself inwardly. What feels like delay is sometimes divine protection. What feels like failure is sometimes mercy. God will often remove the desire for things that are not connected to your true purpose. He will let the excitement fade. He will let the emptiness become visible. He will expose the difference between what feeds your ego and what feeds your spirit. You do not have to become someone else to fulfill your purpose. You do not have to imitate another person's life to be valuable. God created your path with intention. The moment you stop comparing yourself to others is the moment clarity begins to return. Peace comes back when you stop competing with people who were never assigned to your journey. Freedom begins when you finally admit that some ambitions were never yours to carry in the first place. Freedom begins when you finally admit that some ambitions were never yours to carry in the first place. The truth is, not every opportunity in front of you came from God. Some doors were opened by distraction. Some paths were fueled by pride. Some decisions were driven by fear of missing out, fear of being unnoticed, or fear of living a simple life. Just because something looks successful does not mean it is spiritual. Just because everyone applauds it does not mean heaven approved it. God will never bless a path that slowly pulls your heart away from Him, no matter how attractive that path may appear. There are seasons when people become so focused on achievement that they stop listening for God's direction altogether. They wake up every day consumed with chasing money, recognition, influence and control, believing those things will finally give them peace. But while they are building their image, their spiritual life begins to collapse quietly behind the scenes. Prayer becomes rare, peace disappears, rest feels impossible. They become emotionally empty while trying to maintain an outward appearance of success. That is what happens when ambition becomes an idol. Anything you place above obedience will eventually begin to control you. God never designed success to replace intimacy with Him. He never intended for your calling to cost you your soul. Yet many people continue running toward things that are slowly destroying their inner life because they are addicted to achievement. They believe stopping would make them look weak. They believe surrender would make them look unsuccessful, so they continue forcing themselves through doors that God never asked them to walk through. They stay in environments that poison their spirit because leaving would hurt their pride. They keep pursuing goals that no longer bring peace because they already invested too much time trying to prove something to people. Sometimes the reason you feel constantly restless is because your spirit recognizes what your flesh refuses to admit. Deep down, you know certain pursuits are taking you further from God instead of closer to Him. You know some ambitions have filled your life with pressure instead of purpose. You know you have been striving endlessly without feeling fulfilled. The world may call it determination, but heaven sees exhaustion from carrying burdens you were never meant to carry. God's direction always produces peace, even when the process is difficult. His plans may stretch you, but they will not empty you of your identity. When God opens a door, you do not have to compromise your values to stay there. You do not have to lose your integrity to maintain it. You do not have to become cold, prideful, dishonest, or spiritually disconnected to keep succeeding. The blessing of God should never require you to abandon the presence of God. There are people who gained everything they once prayed for, only to realize they lost themselves along the journey. They achieved the title, the business, the platform, the relationship, or the financial status they dreamed about, but inside they still felt broken and distant from God. That is because external success can never replace spiritual alignment. If your accomplishments are pulling you away from your Creator, then eventually those accomplishments will become heavy instead of rewarding. God will often interrupt your plans to protect your future. He may close doors that looked perfect to you because He sees what those doors would eventually do to your heart. He may slow you down because your ambition is moving faster than your spiritual maturity. He may remove certain desires because they are rooted in ego instead of purpose. In those moments, surrender feels painful because your flesh wants control, but obedience always leads to something greater than self-made success. The dangerous thing about the wrong ambition is that it can still produce temporary rewards. You may still gain attention. You may still make money. People may still celebrate you. But if the path is pulling you away from the voice of God, eventually the emptiness will become impossible to ignore. The applause of people cannot replace the peace that comes from walking in alignment with God's will. No level of success is worth losing your joy, your character, your peace, or your relationship with Him. No level of success is worth losing your joy, your character, your peace, or your relationship with Him. Yet this is exactly what happens when people continue chasing ambitions that were never rooted in God's purpose for their lives. They become trapped in a cycle of endless striving, believing that one more achievement, one more promotion, one more opportunity, or one more victory will finally make them feel complete. But the deeper they go, the more exhausted they become. Chasing success without peace will slowly drain the life out of your spirit. There is a kind of exhaustion that sleep cannot fix. It is the exhaustion that comes from carrying pressure every single day while pretending everything is fine. It is waking up with anxiety before the day. Why even begins? It is constantly feeling the need to outperform, outwork and outshine everyone around you because your identity has become tied to your achievements. People may admire your discipline and call you driven, but deep inside you feel emotionally tired, spiritually disconnected, and mentally overwhelmed. The world celebrates hustle, but God never called his children to destroy themselves in order to feel valuable. Many people are successful in public but broken in private. They know how to appear confident while silently battling fear and emptiness. They smile in front of others while secretly feeling trapped by the very life they worked so hard to build. They cannot rest because they fear losing what they gained. They cannot slow down because they built their worth on productivity. Their mind is constantly racing, their heart is constantly heavy, and their soul is constantly searching for something deeper than achievement. The enemy wants people to believe that peace can wait until after success arrives. He convinces them that rest is for later, joy is for later, healing is for later, and closeness with God is for later. So they sacrifice their present peace while sing a future that never truly satisfies them. Every milestone only creates another mountain to climb. Every accomplishment only creates another pressure to maintain. Without God at the center, ambition becomes a prison disguised as progress. God never intended for your life to be ruled by constant pressure. He did not create you to live anxious, burned out, emotionally numb, and spiritually empty. The pace of the world pushes people to move faster and faster until they completely lose themselves. People no longer know how to be still. They no longer know how to listen to God because their entire life is built around performance and survival. They become addicted to being busy because silence forces them to confront what they have been avoiding internally. Some people are exhausted because they are fighting battles God never told them to fight. They are carrying responsibilities God never assigned to them. They are pursuing goals that look impressive to others but feel heavy to their spirit. Every day becomes harder because they are operating outside of alignment. The more they chase, the less peace they have. The more they achieve, the emptier they feel. That is the warning sign. That success has become disconnected from purpose. True success should not cost you your mental health, your family, your integrity, or your relationship with God. If gaining something requires losing yourself, then eventually that achievement will become a burden instead of a blessing. God's plans bring peace even during hard seasons because his presence gives strength where human striving cannot. When you walk in alignment with him, you no longer have to force everything through fear and pressure. You begin to understand that your worth is not measured by how much you produce. There are moments when God allows exhaustion to expose what your heart has been chasing. He lets you feel the emptiness of self-made ambition so you can finally realize that no amount of worldly success can replace spiritual peace. He allows the pressure to become unbearable so you stop depending on your own strength and start seeking his direction again. Sometimes burnout is not just physical tiredness. Sometimes it is the soul crying out for realignment. Peace is not laziness. Rest is not weakness. Slowing down to hear God is not failure. Some of the most powerful decisions you will ever make are the ones where you stop forcing what no longer gives peace. The world may tell you to keep pushing at all costs, but wisdom knows when ambition has become unhealthy. There is a difference between working with purpose and destroying yourself trying to prove your worth. God never asked you to earn your value through endless exhaustion. God never asked you to earn your value through endless exhaustion. The moment you begin believing that your worth depends on how much you accomplish, you also begin giving other people the power to define your identity. That is why so many people spend their lives trying to prove themselves to individuals who were never capable of appreciating them in the first place. They work harder, achieve more, chase bigger goals, and sacrifice their peace, hoping that one day the people who ignored them, rejected them, or doubted them will finally recognize their value. But living to impress people is one of the fastest ways to lose yourself spiritually. There are wounds that quietly shape ambition. Some people were constantly criticized growing up. Some were compared to others until they felt invisible. Some were rejected, abandoned, mocked, or underestimated. Those experiences created a deep hunger for validation. Without realizing it, they built their entire life around proving they were enough. Every success became another attempt to silence old pain. Every achievement became another way to seek approval from people who never truly supported them. But no amount of applause can heal insecurity when the heart is still wounded. The danger of living for validation is that it never ends. Once you gain approval from one group of people, you immediately begin seeking it from another. You become trapped in a cycle where your peace depends on how others respond to you. Their praise makes you feel worthy, and their rejection makes you question yourself. This kind of pressure slowly destroys emotional stability because your identity keeps changing based on public opinion. God never intended for your confidence to be built on human approval because people are inconsistent. They celebrate you one moment and criticize you the next. There are people exhausting themselves every day trying to prove they are successful enough, attractive enough, talented enough, intelligent enough, or important enough to be accepted. They constantly compare themselves to they're because they fear being left behind. Social media has intensified this struggle. People see carefully edited versions of someone else's life and suddenly feel like they are failing. They begin chasing lifestyles, careers, and ambitions that do not even align with who they truly are. Instead of seeking God's direction, they become consumed with trying to maintain an image. God never called you to build your life around performance. You do not have to constantly prove your value to people who already decided not to see your worth. Some individuals will never appreciate you no matter how much you accomplish because their inability to value you has nothing to do with your actual purpose. If you spend your life trying to convince everyone to believe in you, you will waste years carrying emotional burdens God never asked you to carry. One of the hardest things to surrender is the desire to be recognized by people who hurt you. The flesh wants revenge through success. It wants to rise high enough that doubters regret underestimating you. It wants validation from those who once ignored your potential. But when ambition is fueled by bitterness, pride, or wounded ego, it eventually reduces emptiness instead of fulfillment. Even after achieving your goals, the pain remains because success was never meant to heal rejection. God wants to free you from the exhausting need to constantly prove yourself. Your identity was never meant to depend on people's opinions. You are valuable because God created you with purpose, not because strangers approve of your achievements. When you truly understand this, something changes inside you. You stop forcing yourself into spaces where you are not valued. You stop chasing attention to feel important. You stop measuring your life against everyone else's timeline. You stop allowing criticism to control your emotions. Some doors remain closed because God knows you are still seeking validation more than purpose. He knows that if He gives you certain platforms or opportunities before healing your heart, you may become addicted to human approval instead of depending on Him. That is why healing matters before elevation. God wants your identity rooted in Him so deeply that success can never corrupt your spirit and rejection can never destroy your confidence. There is freedom in no longer needing to impress people. There is peace in no longer performing for acceptance. When you finally release the burden of proving yourself, you begin living from purpose instead of pressure. You begin making decisions based on obedience instead of public opinion. You realize that not everyone is assigned to understand your journey, and that is okay. Some people will misunderstand you, overlook you, and doubt you no matter what you do, but their opinion cannot cancel the purpose God placed over your life. Some people will misunderstand you, overlook you, and doubt you no matter what you do, but their opinion cannot cancel the purpose God placed over your life. What delays many people, however, is not the opinion of others but their own refusal to obey God completely. Delayed obedience keeps people trapped in battles they were never meant to fight. When God tells you to let go of something and you continue holding on to it, the weight eventually becomes unbearable. The longer you resist His direction, the more exhausted your spirit becomes. There are moments when God speaks clearly to the heart. He tells you to walk away from certain environments, relationships, habits, ambitions, or pursuits, because he sees where they are leading. But obedience often feels uncomfortable because it requires surrender. Your flesh wants control, your emotions want familiarity, your pride wants to keep proving something. So instead of obeying quickly, people delay. They negotiate with God. They try to hold on to things he already told them to release. They keep asking for signs while ignoring the conviction already present inside them. Many people are fighting unnecessary emotional battles because they stayed connected to what God already warned them about. They are emotionally drained because they refuse to leave toxic situations when God first instructed them to move. They are spiritually stuck because they keep revisiting places, people, and ambitions that no longer align with their calling. Delayed obedience creates frustration because deep down the spirit recognizes when life is moving outside of alignment with God's will. Sometimes people think they are under attack when in reality they are simply resisting God's direction. They ask why they have no peace, but they continue walking paths God told them to leave behind. They ask why they feel spiritually dry, but they continue feeding ambitions rooted in pride and compassion. They ask God for clarity while ignoring the instructions he already gave them months or even years ago. Partial obedience still creates distance between you and the peace God wants for your life. The dangerous thing about delayed obedience is that over time the heart becomes numb. What once convicted you no longer bothers you. What once felt spiritually heavy starts feeling normal. Slowly, compromise becomes comfortable. People convince themselves they can maintain disobedience while still expecting the fullness of God's peace. But peace cannot fully exist where constant resistance to God remains. The soul was never designed to thrive outside of obedience. God often calls people to release ambitions that appear successful outwardly because he sees the hidden damage those ambitions are causing inwardly. Sometimes he asks you to step away from opportunities that feed your ego but starve your spirit. Sometimes he tells you to slow down because your pace is destroying your relationship with him. Sometimes he removes certain desires because he knows they will eventually become idols in your life. Obedience may feel painful in the moment, but disobedience always creates heavier consequences over time. There are people who wasted years fighting battles God never intended for them to carry because they refused to surrender their own plans. They kept forcing relationships God never blessed. They kept chasing careers God never assigned to them. They kept staying in environments that drained their peace because leaving required faith. Instead of trusting God's direction, they trusted their own understanding. But eventually the frustration became impossible to ignore because striving outside of God's will always produces weariness. Obedience is not weakness. Walking away from what God told you to leave is not failure. In fact, some of the strongest decisions you will ever make require surrender instead of control. It takes spiritual maturity to release ambitions that no longer align with God's purpose. It takes faith to trust that his plans are better than the ones you created for yourself. Many people delay obedience because they fear losing opportunities, but what God removes can never compare to what he is preparing. The longer you hold on to something God is asking you to release, the harder the process becomes. Not because God wants to punish you, but because resistance creates unnecessary struggle. The peace you are searching for often begins with simple obedience. Sometimes breakthrough does not come from gaining more, but from finally letting go. The moment you stop fighting to keep what God is removing, clarity begins to return. Your spirit begins to breathe again. The confusion starts lifting because obedience reconnects you with divine direction. God is not trying to take purpose away from you. He is trying to rescue you from ambitions that would eventually lead you further from him. Every instruction he gives carries protection, wisdom, and love behind it. Even when obedience feels difficult, it is always leading you towards something greater than temporary success or human approval. Even when obedience feels difficult, it is always leading you towards something greater than temporary success or human approval. What many people fail to understand is that surrender is not the end of purpose, it is the beginning of true direction. As long as your hands are tightly holding on to your own plans, it becomes difficult to fully receive what God is trying to place into your life. Surrendering your own ambitions makes room for something far greater than anything you could build through pressure, pride, or fear. One of the hardest things for the human heart to accept is that God's plans often look different from personal expectations. People imagine certain timelines, careers, relationships, and outcomes, then become frustrated when life does not unfold according to those plans. They pray for God's will, but secretly hope His will matches their own desires exactly. When it does not, disappointment begins to grow. Some people become angry, confused, or discouraged because they believe surrender means losing something valuable. But many times, what feels like loss is actually protection and redirection. God sees the full picture while human understanding only sees the moment. There are ambitions people fight desperately to keep that would eventually damage their peace, character, relationships, and spiritual health. There are doors people cry over after they close, not realizing those same doors would have led them into deeper emptiness. Sometimes the greatest blessing God can give you is preventing you from reaching places that would have destroyed you internally. Surrender requires trust. It requires believing that God's wisdom is greater than your emotions, your desires, and your limited perspective. That kind of trust is difficult because the flesh naturally wants certainty and control. People want to know every detail before they obey. They want guarantees before they release what feels familiar. But faith was never built on complete visibility. Faith moves even when the full path cannot yet be seen. There are seasons when God intentionally removes distractions, false ambitions, and unhealthy attachments because He is preparing your heart for real purpose. At first, this process can feel painful because identity was connected to those things for so long. Some people built their entire sense of worth around a career, a relationship, a title, or a dream they believed would complete them. When God begins separating them from those things, they feel lost because they no longer know who they are without them. But sometimes God has to strip away false identity before revealing true calling. The problem with self-made ambition is that it constantly demands more effort, more proving, more pressure, more striving. But when God leads your life, purpose begins flowing from alignment instinctively. Of endless performance, you stop living from anxiety and start living from trust. You stop chasing every opportunity out of fear. You become more selective, more peaceful, and more spiritually aware because your confidence is no longer built on worldly validation. Surrendering your plans does not mean becoming passive or unmotivated. God still calls people to work hard, grow, create, and pursue purpose with discipline. But there is a difference between ambition driven by obedience and ambition driven by insecurity. One produces peace while the other produces constant exhaustion. One is rooted in trust while the other is rooted in fear. God's direction may stretch you, but it will never require you to abandon your soul in order to succeed. There are moments when God asks you to release something before He reveals what comes next. That season of uncertainty tests the heart deeply. It forces you to choose whether you trust God Himself or only trust Him when life makes sense. Many people want new direction while still clinging to old attachments. They ask God for fresh purpose while refusing to release the ambitions He already told them to lay down. But transformation cannot fully happen while the heart remains divided between obedience and control. The beautiful thing about surrender is that it creates space for peace to return. When you stop forcing outcomes, competing with others, and carrying ambitions that were never meant for you, your spirit begins to heal. Clarity increases. Rest returns. You begin hearing God's voice more clearly because the noise of striving no longer controls your mind. What once felt confusing starts becoming simpler because alignment with God always brings direction. Some people are one act of surrender away from the breakthrough they have been praying for. Not because God wants to withhold blessings, but because He knows certain ambitions would keep pulling them away from their true purpose. The life God prepares for you will never require you to lose yourself trying to maintain it. His plans bring peace alongside purpose. His direction strengthens the spirit instead of constantly draining it. And often the first step into that greater life begins with the courage to finally lay down the ambitions that were never his. And often the first step into that greater life begins with the courage to finally lay down the ambitions. They were never his. The moment you release what God never assigned to you, something powerful begins to happen inside your spirit. The pressure starts breaking. The confusion slowly fades. The constant need to compete loses its grip on your mind. For the first time in a long time, you begin to breathe without carrying the unbearable weight of trying to become someone you were never created to be. That is when true purpose starts unfolding. Many people spend years chasing identities that do not belong to them. They become versions of themselves that gain approval from the world but feel unfamiliar to their own soul. They silence their convictions to fit into environments God never designed for them. They force themselves into paths that look successful publicly while privately feeling disconnected, empty, and exhausted. But when God begins pulling them back toward purpose, He also begins restoring the parts of them that were buried underneath pressure and performance. True purpose is not built through comparison. It is discovered through alignment with God. The reason so many people feel lost is because they have spent more time listening to the expectations of people than listening to the voice of God. Society tells them to chase status, visibility, wealth, and recognition at all costs. But purpose is deeper than applause. Purpose is not simply about what makes you look important. It is about what keeps your spirit connected to God while allowing your life to reflect His direction. When false ambition finally leaves your heart, peace begins to enter places where anxiety once ruled. You stop waking up every day feeling like your entire worth depends on productivity. You stop measuring yourself against everyone else's achievements. You stop forcing doors open out of fear of being left behind. Instead of constantly striving, you begin trusting. Instead of obsessing over outcomes, you begin focusing on obedience. Instead of trying to control every detail of your future, you begin allowing God to lead one step at a time. Purpose often unfolds quietly before it becomes visible publicly. Many people miss this because they are addicted to instant recognition. They want fast success, fast results, and immediate validation. But God frequently develops purpose in hidden seasons where nobody is applauding. Those hidden moments build character, wisdom, humility, patience, and spiritual maturity. Without those foundations, success can easily become destructive. God cares more about who you are becoming than how quickly you arrive somewhere. There is a major difference between chasing ambition and walking in purpose. Ambition driven by ego constantly asks, "How can I become greater than everyone else?" But purpose asks, "How can my life glorify God?" Ambition rooted in insecurity creates pressure, fear, and comparison. Purpose rooted in God creates peace, clarity, and stability. One constantly drains you while the other strengthens you even during difficult seasons. Some people are afraid to let go of false ambition because they secretly believe nothing meaningful will remain afterward. They fear surrender will leave them empty, unsuccessful, or forgotten. But God never removes something without understanding what your spirit truly needs. When He asks you to release a certain pursuit, it is because He sees beyond temporary excitement. He sees where each path leads. He knows which ambitions will eventually consume your peace and which directions will produce lasting fulfillment. The beautiful thing about God's purpose is that it does not require you to pretend. You no longer have to wear masks to gain acceptance. You no longer have to exhaust yourself trying to maintain an image. You no longer have to sacrifice your relationship with God in order to feel successful. Purpose allows you to live with integrity because your identity is no longer built on performance. Even when challenges come, there is peace in knowing you are walking where God called you to walk. There will always be distractions trying to pull you back into comparison, pride, and pressure. The world constantly rewards appearance over alignment, but wisdom recognizes that not every opportunity deserves pursuit. Some things look impressive but carry hidden emptiness. Some ambitions promise fulfillment while quietly stealing peace. Discernment becomes essential because the enemy often disguises distraction as success. The moment you stop building your life around proving yourself, competing with others, and forcing your own plans, your relationship with God begins deepening in ways you never imagined. Your heart becomes lighter because you are no longer carrying dreams born from fear and insecurity. You begin experiencing the freedom that comes from knowing. Your purpose is not something you have to manufacture through endless striving. God already placed meaning inside your life before the world ever gave its opinion. And when you finally surrender fully to Him, the purpose that unfolds will always be greater than the ambitions you were afraid to release.